In 1985, Sandra Bennett bent down to check her shopping list in a crowded supermarket in Jacksonville, while her 4-year-old daughter, Olivia, stood right beside her, still touching the edge of the shopping cart. 20 seconds later, Sandra looked up, and Olivia was gone. No crying, no struggle, no footprints of a child running away. Police sealed off the entire area, but there were no clear surveillance cameras, no license plates, no physical evidence of any kind. Neighbors whispered that maybe Olivia had wandered off and been taken home by someone kind. Friends consoled Sandra that the little girl might have been adopted by another family. And then more than 30 years later, a genealogy DNA test meant only to find European ancestors. Unexpectedly revealed an anomaly, a close relative the Bennett family had never heard of. A woman in Arizona whose DNA structure matched that of a child missing from Florida. And it was this genetic marker that changed everything. Because if Olivia was truly alive somewhere else, then for 31 years, who had taken her from that supermarket without anyone seeing? Who had hidden her cross-country journey? And why did the truth only surface when technology finally outpaced the era in which the crime occurred? Before we dive deeper into this shocking true story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love journeys in search of forgotten justice, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Florida in the 1980s had the image of peaceful suburbs where young families believed their kids could play in the yard, ride bikes along the sidewalk, or go to the store with their parents without having to watch for danger. Jacksonville, with its tree-lined streets and old-style shopping centers, was considered one of the safest and friendliest places. The Bennett family lived in just such a neighborhood. A small, clean house, neatly mowed lawn, neighbors who greeted each other every morning. Michael Bennett worked at a local TV station, while his wife Sandra was a bank teller who always kept everything organized and thoughtful. Their daughter Olivia, age 4, was an active but clingy child who loved carrying her little brown stuffed animal wherever she went. She had a habit of observing everything with curious eyes, often pointing at strange items and asking endless questions that sometimes made Sandra laugh and feel exhausted at the same time. That day was just an ordinary morning like hundreds of others. Sandra took Olivia to the big supermarket near their neighborhood to buy weekly groceries. Inside the store were the familiar sounds of shopping carts, loudspeaker announcements, white fluorescent lights, and the mixed smell of fruit and packaging paper. Olivia took short-running steps beside her mother, still hugging her stuffed animal. Nothing made Sandra suspicious, except for one small detail she barely noticed at first: a strange woman standing near the children's section, wearing a wide-brimmed hat that almost completely covered her face. At first, Sandra only glimpsed this person staring at Olivia longer than usual. She assumed it was the kind of look adults sometimes give cute kids out of affection or harmless curiosity. But then, as Sandra moved to the next aisle to pick items, the same woman appeared again in a different spot, still with an unreadable expression and eyes fixed on Olivia. Sandra even felt the woman was standing too close for it to be coincidence. Still, among dozens of people in the supermarket, and with her mind busy with the shopping list, Sandra only briefly thought it was random. It was only in that decisive moment, when Sandra bent down to check the items in her cart, that those few seconds of inattention created an opening no one could have foreseen. Olivia, like many small children do, took a few steps toward the toy display, just a short distance from her mother, but enough to be out of sight while Sandra was bent over. When Sandra straightened up, the cart was still there, the list still in her hand, but Olivia had vanished. A feeling of emptiness instantly spread through her body. Sandra scanned the area, called her daughter's name, looked down nearby aisles, thinking Olivia was just playing hide-and-seek behind the shelves. One shopper said they had just seen a woman leading a little girl toward the exit, but wasn't sure if it was Olivia. That information sent Sandra running toward the supermarket doors. The huge parking lot stretched out in front of her, but there was absolutely no sign of Olivia. No car that looked like their family car, no glimpse of the woman Sandra had seen inside. Everything seemed to have been swept away in a few short minutes. Sandra ran between the rows of cars, calling her daughter's name louder, her voice breaking with panic, eyes searching every corner for the tiniest clue. A few passers-by tried to help, but no one had seen anything clear. The moment she realized Olivia was nowhere in sight, not in the store, not in the parking lot, not near the entrance. Sandra almost collapsed. She ran back inside the supermarket, asked employees to help search, but every effort turned up no sign that Olivia was still in the building. The minutes that followed were pure chaos, a desperate race by a mother looking for her child in a crowded space that offered no answers. When every possibility within reach was exhausted, Sandra was forced to do what no parent ever wants to do: call the police to report her child missing. As soon as the report of Olivia's disappearance reached the 911 system, local police responded almost instantly, and within minutes, Jacksonville Sheriff's Office patrol cars were parked in front of the supermarket. Sandra's panic, the frantic voices of store employees and shoppers turned the area into chaos, forcing officers to quickly establish order to begin the investigation. They asked that the entrances be temporarily closed and restricted movement near the scene to avoid disturbing any remaining evidence. One group of officers took Sandra aside for an initial statement, the last moment she saw Olivia, the exact location where they had been standing, the length of time she was distracted, and the description of the strange woman she had noticed earlier. At the same time, another team swept the parking lot, marking areas for further checking. From Sandra's initial account and witness statement, police quickly sketched a temporary timeline. Olivia was last seen in the children's toy area. Her mother was bent over checking the cart. The woman in the wide-brimmed hat was nearby. The likely exit was the main doors. The parking lot was the next destination. If a vehicle was involved, building the timeline relied not only on Sandra's statement but also on a witness near the supermarket doors, who saw a little girl being led outside. Police asked store employees to identify peak shopping hours, who had left during the exact window Olivia disappeared, and whether anyone had acted strangely. Simultaneously, a team approached the manager's office to pull security footage. Although the supermarket's camera system in 1985 was primitive, blurry images and limited coverage, officers still tried to spot suspicious movement: a figure in a wide-brimmed hat, activity near the toy section, and the possibility of an adult-child pair leaving through the main doors. They rewound and replayed footage repeatedly, noting times when the automatic doors opened in quick succession, and cross-referencing people who appeared on camera. Any blurry image that could be a clue was flagged for deeper analysis. Beyond cameras, police searched the floor and aisles where Olivia vanished for physical evidence: drag marks, dropped items, child-sized shoe prints, or adult footprints nearby. There were no signs of struggle or disturbance, leading investigators to lean toward the theory that Olivia was led away skillfully rather than forcibly abducted in a crowded public place. This fit the pattern of child abductions where the perpetrator convinces the victim they are a trusted person or creates a situation that makes the child cooperate. While evidence collection continued at the scene, a specialized team began building a suspect description based on what witnesses and Sandra remembered: female, average build, wide-brimmed hat, light jacket despite the heat, slightly hurried gait. All these details were entered into a temporary file to cross-check against resident databases and anyone with a history of suspicious behavior in the area. The biggest missing piece was the possible vehicle, so the parking lot team conducted a full sweep, identifying cars that left just before police arrived, gathering eyewitness descriptions of a teal-colored car that sped away faster than normal, and recording plates of any suspicious vehicles still on site. One officer coordinated information between teams, constantly combining statements, video and scene data to prioritize investigative direction. When the supermarket yielded no further valuable clues, police expanded the search, contacting nearby stores for their footage, canvassing nearby gas stations to see if anyone noticed a woman with a little girl, and checking major roads leading from the parking lot. The expansion followed a widening circle model, starting with the supermarket as the center and spreading outward in every direction the suspect might have taken in the first few minutes. The entire initial phase operated under urgent but strict procedure: collect, analyze, cross-refs, expand, search. Though no clear conclusion emerged yet, police determined this was not a case of a lost child, but an organized abnormal incident requiring additional manpower and expansion beyond the supermarket within the first few hours. Securing the supermarket scene was only the beginning, and as soon as enough initial information was gathered to map the suspect's likely direction, police immediately expanded the search outside the building, The K-9 unit was deployed almost right after investigators confirmed Olivia's last known location, and the tracking dogs began following the child's unique scent from the toy area straight to the main entrance. The scent trail led directly to the parking lot, further confirming that Olivia had been removed from the crowded area before anyone noticed anything wrong. In the parking lot, the dogs lost the trail at an empty space where a vehicle had likely been parked, supporting the theory that the suspect used a car to flee. From there, the entire surrounding area was quickly divided into smaller zones for searching. The residential neighborhood directly behind the shopping center, numerous vacant lots between side streets, and small turnoffs leading to major roads. All possible quick escape routes if the suspect got in a car and left the lot within the first few minutes. JSO patrol teams coordinated with local traffic police to check every road directly connected to the supermarket, especially less traveled turns that could quickly lead away from the residential area. Temporary checkpoints were set up at key intersections to ask if anyone had seen a woman with a little girl or a vehicle acting strangely. At the same time, investigators continued collecting footage from locations around the supermarket, since the store's own system was so limited. Nearby shops, pharmacies, convenience stores, and parking facilities were approached within the first hour to pull whatever images they had. Even though cameras from that era were poor quality and many places only stored sporadic still frames, police still analyzed every clip for matching vehicles or people. Among the recovered videos, some captured traffic on the main road near the supermarket. Investigators noted timestamps, directions, and colors of vehicles that appeared within the window the suspect could have left. Any car that seemed to speed off or change direction oddly was flagged for follow-up. In parallel with video analysis, police sought secondary witnesses, people who weren't inside the supermarket but were nearby at the time of the incident. They went door to door in homes near the store, asking if anyone saw a woman leading a little girl or a matching vehicle. Some residents said they heard tires screech but didn't see the car clearly. Others reported seeing a woman in a wide-brimmed hat walking through the neighborhood in the days prior, though the timing didn't match the incident. Police logged everything for cross-referencing. Main intersection gas stations were also canvassed. Employees were asked about customers during the suspected time frame, whether a woman with a child stopped by, anyone who filled up hurriedly, or which direction a vehicle went after leaving. Some employees said they didn't notice anything, while others vaguely recalled a dark-colored car that came and left quickly but couldn't provide more details. Police continued expanding to farther stores, including fast food restaurants, department stores, and auto shops that might have exterior cameras. Many places had no usable footage because tapes were overwritten on a cycle or the systems were unreliable, but a few timely clips were recovered for the investigation. Vehicle tracking ran parallel to witness canvassing, and in the process, police began compiling a list of cars that left the area within 10 minutes of Olivia's last sighting. These vehicles were categorized by color, location seen, and departure speed. Though the initial list was long, most belonged to regular shoppers leaving at that time, but a handful with unknown owners or odd circumstances were flagged for tracking. While checking homes, police hoped to find residential security cameras, still very rare in 1985, but most families didn't have them. That forced the search teams to rely on direct observation, handwritten notes, and witness memory. Despite the wide scale and rapid deployment, no single clue was strong enough to pinpoint the suspect's clear direction. The K-9 scent stopped at the parking lot, cameras provided no sharp images, witnesses only recalled scattered details, and no physical evidence was left behind to follow. Nevertheless, all the data gathered during this emergency search phase became the foundation for police to compile, cross-check, and reorganize as they prepared for the next step in the investigation. The data obtained from the emergency search made police realize that every important clue now hinged on the statements of people who were inside the supermarket at the moment Olivia disappeared. As soon as they finished cordoning off the area and sweeping the surroundings, the investigative team returned inside the building to compile and systematically categorize all witness statements more thoroughly. Although many people had initially given hurried answers amid the chaos, they were now asked to describe in detail the behavior, position, and exact time they observed anything. Supermarket employees, shoppers in the toy section, those in the aisles near the main entrance, and people at the checkout counters during the critical time frame were all called in to provide more detailed information. Most statements remained fragmented. Some remembered seeing a woman wearing a wide-brimmed hat, looking toward Olivia. Others recalled seeing a woman leading a little girl out the door but weren't sure it was Olivia because it happened too fast. And some only remembered a dark-colored car leaving the parking lot at high speed but couldn't see who was inside. Yet it was precisely these scattered fragments, when reassembled according to each person's location and the time they were standing in the store, that began to form a broader picture of what had happened. The investigators recreated a floor plan of the supermarket, marking where each witness had stood, their line of sight, whether shelves obstructed their view, and the exact moment they noticed a particular detail. Cross-referencing helped them assess the reliability of each statement. Witnesses near the main entrance had a direct line of sight to anyone leaving the building, while those deeper in the aisles could only catch glimpses of strangers and couldn't distinguish features clearly. Detectives noted statements that matched in timing and location, forming a high reliability group, while mismatched statements in space or time were set aside for later review. From there they began to categorize who might actually have seen the suspect, who only registered normal shopper activity, and who might have misremembered in the tense atmosphere. Once the team had sketched out the suspect's likely movement sequence based on the most consistent statements, they focused on physical descriptions. Though no one could say they saw the woman's face clearly enough to identify her, several details repeated across accounts: a light-colored wide-brimmed hat that obscured most of the face, an average slightly thin build, adult height, a thin jacket unusual for Florida weather at that time, and a large crossbody bag. One witness even recalled a gait that seemed somewhat hurried but not enough to draw unusual attention, which matched the description from a witness near the door. When compiled, these common points were sufficient for the task force to create the first suspect sketch. Though it wasn't a detailed facial composite due to the lack of facial information, the sketch emphasized clothing, body type, possible hairstyle if inferable, and the highly recognizable wide-brimmed hat. This sketch then served as the basis for comparison with records of women of similar build previously noted in the area for unusual behavior or involvement in suspicious situations. Police continued screening local resident data, especially women living alone, frequently seen around the shopping district, or with unclear travel histories. Although electronic records were limited at the time, the team relied on paper files, temporary residency logs, rental lists, and information from local shop owners to assemble an initial list. Among them, individuals previously suspected of inappropriate approaches toward children or disturbances in shopping centers were prioritized for checking. Additionally, police examined lists of people who had recently moved in or out of the area shortly before the incident, since the suspect might be transient or only temporarily present in the neighborhood around the supermarket. Next, they cross-referenced this list with witness descriptions to see who most closely matched appearance, clothing, or habits. Every name that met the criteria was flagged for further verification through deeper investigative steps. The process of screening witnesses and identifying the suspect was a patient filtering of information. Statements that initially seemed important often proved useless when placed in proper context, while details that first appeared vague became foundational when repeated across multiple witnesses, clarifying the suspect's path. By the end of this phase, police could not yet pinpoint a specific suspect, but they had narrowed down the appearance and behavior of the woman seen near Olivia and created a list of local women who fit the description for continued investigation in subsequent steps. From the statements screened in the previous phase, the most consistently repeated detail concerned a dark green teal blue-green car leaving the parking lot faster than normal within the exact time window Olivia vanished. Although no witness saw the license plate and the vehicle was only vaguely described as a mid-size sedan, this information was enough for the investigative team to focus on the vehicle as a link. Police began by comparing witness descriptions with popular car models in Florida at that time: Chevrolet Caprice, Oldsmobile Cutlass, Ford Ltd., and several late 1970s, early 1980s sedans with similar green paint. From this, they determined the Chevrolet Caprice best matched the size and shape witnesses glimpsed as it sped away. This was not an absolute conclusion, but the most plausible direction for the next investigative step. After identifying the likely model group, detectives queried the DMV to filter all green sedans registered within the supermarket's surrounding area, including nearby neighborhoods, streets along major routes, and adjacent counties where such vehicles might be owned. Because the data systems of that era couldn't filter by multiple criteria simultaneously like modern ones, Officers had to perform several manual steps, filter by color, then by body style, then by model year to narrow the list. The initial list reached hundreds of vehicles, but after eliminating company-owned cars, registrations from areas too far away, or vehicles that didn't match the size description, the number dropped to a few dozen. With the narrowed list, the team moved on to verifying alibis of the vehicle owners for the time Olivia disappeared. Detectives went door to door asking owners to recount where they were, who could confirm their presence, and whether they or anyone else used the car during the critical hours. Many owners had solid alibis, they were at work, shopping or with family at the time of the incident. Others hadn't used the car that morning or had it in the shop for repairs, removing them from the list immediately. However, some cases required closer scrutiny, people living alone with no one to confirm their whereabouts, or with unclear schedule. In those instances, police cross-checked commute patterns, daily habits, and minor points of overlap, such as distance between residence and supermarket, frequency of visits to the shopping area, or any unusual travel history. Concurrently with alibi checks, the team compared the reported direction the car took when leaving the lot with the home or workplace locations of owners on the list. For example, if witnesses saw the car turn east, owners living or frequently traveling east were prioritized. This significantly reduced the number of vehicles needing in-depth investigation. At the same time, police compiled lists of vehicles previously ticketed or reported for suspicious behavior around the supermarket in the prior 3 months. One green sedan previously noted parked near a children's toy area at another mall, the previous month was re-examined, but ultimately traced to a local family with no connection. Eliminating vehicles was both swift and cautious. Cars with clear alibis were dropped immediately, those matching the description but lacking other red flags were noted for monitoring, and vehicles with anomalies were moved to the priority list. Unfortunately, despite these efforts, no vehicle perfectly matched the scarce witness details. No license plate, no clear camera images, and no physical evidence in the parking lot made narrowing the vehicle list especially difficult. By the end of this phase, investigators had eliminated most of the original list, but still had not clearly identified a suspicious vehicle. Nevertheless, the results laid critical groundwork. Police now knew the type of car they were looking for, which vehicles could not be involved, and had a short list of cars to continue monitoring. Though they could not yet identify the suspect, the vehicle investigation eliminated dozens of possibilities and significantly narrowed the scope, providing a foundation for the next investigative direction. Information gathered from the vehicle investigation and witness statements led police to realize they needed to shift focus to individuals in the area with criminal records, prior offenses, or unusual behavior that might involve approaching children. Immediately after eliminating most mismatched vehicles, the investigative team began compiling a list of potential suspects based on criminal data from Jacksonville and surrounding areas. The list included individuals previously accused of improper contact with children, people with prior kidnapping or child-luring convictions or attempts, those observed loitering unusually around the supermarket in the 3 months before Olivia vanished, and individuals previously reported for disturbances in commercial areas. Additionally, police checked lists of temporary residents or recent movers near the supermarket, as this group could appear without drawing much local attention. Neighbor reports of women or men watching children excessively were also added for cross-checking. Each name on the suspect list was processed methodically. Identity verification, distance between residence and supermarket, and comparison with work or activity records during the hours Olivia went missing. Some suspects had clear alibis, such as being at a job with cameras or multiple witnesses, and were quickly removed. Others lacked specific alibis or lived alone with no one to confirm their location during the critical time, requiring closer examination. For each suspect, investigators compared witness descriptions. Average height, thin build, thin jacket, wide-brimmed hat, hurried but not overtly frantic movement. Though the description wasn't specific enough for 100% identification, ruling people out based on clear contradictions was still useful. For example, suspects who were too tall, too short, had features impossible to conceal with the described hat, or were completely mismatched in age, were eliminated. Several women previously reported for suspicious behavior around shopping areas had their schedules verified, and many had solid alibis, working morning shifts at a hospital, attending community events with many witnesses, or caring for relatives during the relevant hours. These were promptly cleared to avoid wasting resources. However, a few cases required deeper review. Women living near the supermarket with unstable travel histories, previously reported for approaching children in other parking lots, or simply matching the witness description closely. For this small group, police conducted direct interviews and checked additional details, such as vehicles owned, daily routines, and whether they had been near the supermarket the week of the incident. Some suspects offered alibis without corroborating witnesses. Others became defensive or irritated when questioned about their schedules, prompting detectives to flag them for further checks. Still, the absence of direct evidence, no clear facial camera footage, no license plate, no physical evidence, made it extremely difficult to tie any of them conclusively to the disappearance. When the team completed the first round of checks, most initial suspects had been eliminated due to mismatches in appearance, behavior, or timeline. Only a handful of cases could not be fully ruled out, yet none had specific evidence strong enough to become the primary person of interest. The final suspect list was therefore reduced to a very small number, but no one on it had sufficient evidence to be designated the main suspect. This led the investigative team to realize that despite clearing many dead ends and significantly narrowing the field, the crucial piece, the woman in the wide-brimmed hat, described by witnesses, had not yet appeared in any record. Nevertheless, this narrowing process remained vital. It eliminated numerous false leads, confirmed unrelated individuals, and retained only the possibilities requiring further monitoring, enabling the investigative team to continue evaluating data and develop the next direction in the case. The initial narrowing of suspects yielded no clear results, forcing police to broaden the scope of the investigation. Using all data collected in the first 48 hours, the investigative team gathered at headquarters to piece together every fragment of information: the last confirmed sighting of Olivia, the road tracked by the K9 unit, the parking lot spot where the scent trail vanished, the description of the subject in the wide-brimmed hat, the direction the teal-colored vehicle traveled according to witnesses, and the blurry surveillance footage that still captured general movement during the critical time frame. This reassembly was not only to refilter what was already known, but also to determine whether any detail had been overlooked or insufficiently evaluated in the frantic early hours. A dedicated team retraced every possible escape route the suspect might have used, leaving the supermarket, the left turn into a quiet residential area, the road leading to the highway connecting neighboring counties, the narrow side streets that could serve as shortcuts, and the loop around the vacant lot behind the shopping center. The purpose was to identify any traffic cameras, potential witnesses, or unusual vehicle activity on those routes in the narrow window immediately after Olivia disappeared. Police also re-examined data from adjacent counties, recognizing that a suspect fleeing the area by car in minutes was entirely plausible. Another team compared Olivia's case to previous disappearances, with similar signatures in Florida over the prior several years. They looked for recurring patterns: children approached in public places, a female perpetrator, behavior that lured the child away from crowds without drawing attention, and the use of a vehicle to leave the scene almost instantly. From the crime database, investigators found a handful of cases with somewhat similar characteristics but in distant counties, and none with concrete evidence directly linking them to Olivia's abduction. Still, the connection reinforced that the tactic of using a woman to approach children was not unprecedented, though extremely rare. While rescreening old cases, police simultaneously revisited sources that had not been deeply analyzed: secondary statements from people inside the supermarket, who were not primary witnesses, hastily written initial officer notes from the scene, and reports from residents near the shopping center about strangers seen in the area the week prior. Several small details were brought back to the table. Someone had seen a woman in a wide-brimmed hat walking near the supermarket the morning before. A nearby store employee recalled a teal car parked unusually long in the area, but was unsure of the exact day, and one witness reported seeing a woman of similar build asking for directions to the eastern residential neighborhood, though they were uncertain if the timing matched the day of the disappearance. Police meticulously cross-referenced each of these minor details against the previously established timeline checked to see if anything aligned or contradicted. They re-examined the automatic door logs, the moments witnesses saw a little girl being led outside, and the gaps between those events to determine whether any suspect movement had been inadequately considered. Re-evaluating the timeline also revealed inconsistencies in some witness statements, particularly differences in timing among those standing in different locations. Though still insufficient to identify a specific suspect, investigators concluded that the perpetrator, if indeed the woman described, had acted within an extremely tight window, moved decisively, and used a vehicle to flee almost immediately. This reinforced the assessment that the incident may have been planned, or that the suspect at minimum had a clear strategy when approaching Olivia. By the end of this expanded phase, police had not uncovered a breakthrough lead, but they had refined the picture of how the suspect left the supermarket and surrounding area. They now knew the most likely escape routes, the unusual reports before and after the incident, and confirmed that no other disappearance in the region at that time perfectly matched Olivia's pattern. All of this information, while not yet pointing to a clear suspect, was a necessary expansion to prepare for the subsequent re-evaluation phase of the case. Despite the task force re-examining all data, expanding the search perimeter, and cross-checking every available source in the early days, no new lead of significant value emerged to open a possible escape routes had been checked repeatedly, witnesses interviewed multiple times, suspicious vehicles screened, and nearly all eliminated, yet nothing pushed the case forward. Time dragged on, and each day without news made the investigation feel heavier. For weeks, police continued combing every corner of the surrounding neighborhoods, even extending several miles beyond the original radius in search of places the suspect might have stopped or left evidence. A few scattered calls came in from citizens claiming to have seen a little girl, resembling Olivia, or a woman in a wide-brimmed hat, farther away, but field checks revealed every one was unrelated or impossible to verify. Such calls, while offering faint hope, drained time and manpower. As the initial weeks turned into long months, public and media pressure gradually eased. The police department maintained a small team monitoring the case, but there was no longer justification for large-scale searches as in the beginning. Resources had to be allocated to other cases, and though Olivia's disappearance remained on the priority list, no one could deny the investigation was entering a stagnant phase. Eventually, after every feasible avenue had been exhausted without a breakthrough, the case file was reclassified as unsolved. This did not mean the police gave up, it simply reflected that they had no active leads left to pursue without resorting to aimless searching. The file was renumbered and archived in the periodic review missing persons section. For the Bennett family, this decision was not just administrative. It marked the collapse of the hope they had clung to for months. They continued searching unofficially, distributing flyers in neighborhoods, asking residents in surrounding areas, contacting hospitals, children's centers, adoption agencies, even mailing letters to distant counties in hopes someone had seen a girl matching the description. Michael and Sandra divided tasks. One met with community groups, another contacted local churches, one reviewed reports of unidentified children found in other states. One stood in the heat every weekend, handing out flyers on roadsides, yet every effort sank into silence. No one reported seeing Olivia. No unidentified child matched her age and description. There was no sign the suspect stayed in the area or resurfaced. The prolonged silence forced the family to grapple with complex emotions: hope, despair, anger, then hope again. Friends and neighbors helped intensely in the first months, but over time everyone else's lives returned to normal while the Bennetts remained trapped in an unresolved cycle of pain. Part of the reason the case stalled was the limitations of the 1980s. Poor quality cameras, no automated license plate recognition, no national database connecting missing children cases across states. If the suspect left Jacksonville by car within minutes, the chances of tracing her were virtually zero. By the end of the first year, the police department officially closed the file and moved it to unsolved active file status, meaning it could be reopened if new evidence surfaced, but would no longer receive daily active investigation. The Bennetts continued calling police whenever they heard a rumor, a story, or a report of a lost child somewhere, but each call ended in another disappointment. Olivia's disappearance, once a shock to the entire community, gradually slipped into the shadows of the system, becoming a true cold case. A case with no answers, no clear suspect, no physical evidence, and no indication the victim remained in the area after the incident. In that state, the case lay dormant for a long time, like a door that had been closed with no one knowing if or when it might ever open again. In the early 1990s, as law enforcement agencies across the United States began adopting more modern criminal analysis methods, Olivia Bennett's missing person file was pulled for review during a sweep of notable cold cases in Jacksonville. Though no new leads had surfaced, local police decided to forward the file to the FBI for behavioral analysis support, a field rapidly advancing at the time. Experts from the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit re-examined the original data, particularly the description of the woman in the wide-brimmed hat, the approach to Olivia, and the rapid, non-chaotic exit from the scene. Based on documented patterns in the rare child abductions committed by women, the FBI concluded that if the suspect was indeed female, the motive was far more likely tied to psychological issues or complicated family circumstances than random violence. However, the lack of direct evidence prevented deeper profiling. After receiving the FBI assessment, Jacksonville police continued comparing Olivia's case to other child disappearances in Florida and neighboring states. From the late 90s, a few cases shared similarities: children led away from public places, female perpetrator, no signs of force, but upon closer review, none matched in timing, location, or suspect description. Moreover, those cases typically involved clear personal motives, such as custody disputes or mental health issues, unlike Olivia's case, where the suspect had no known connection to the Bennett family. Searching for a common pattern therefore yielded no clear direction. Nevertheless, the cross-referencing effort prompted police to revisit newly emerged criminal records in the county from the late 90s. Several women with prior offenses involving inappropriate contact with children were rescreened, along with individuals previously reported loitering near shopping centers. However, when appearance timelines and alibis were checked, none fit them. A few noteworthy individuals were investigated: recent arrivals to the area, people with irregular schedules, or those previously accused of suspicious behavior in public, but all lacked the critical match to the original witness description. When police asked the FBI to run the file through the behavioral profile the experts had sketched, a woman aged 25-45, discreet demeanor, likely observed the target beforehand. The results were not groundbreaking. The profile was too broad and did not match any specific individual in local or federal records. Narrowing the suspect pool was therefore nearly impossible. After completing the mid-1990s review, police officially noted that the case remained at a standstill. Experts assessed that if the suspect had left Florida immediately after the incident, the chances of tracing her with the tools and data available at that time were virtually nil. There were no new witnesses, no recovered evidence, no reports of unidentified children matching Olivia, and no one coming forward with information years later. Olivia's file continued to be classified as a cold case and was returned to storage, to be pulled again only if unusual reports or new information surfaced. Despite the efforts throughout the 1990s demonstrating the determination of investigators, everything ended in another deadlock, leaving the case silent for many more years. While Olivia Bennett's missing person file gathered dust throughout the 1990s, in a completely different part of America, a little girl was growing up as Emily Carter in an Arizona family, with no one, not even herself, aware that her life was tied to an unsolved case in Florida. The Carters lived in Mesa, a fast-growing but still peacefully southwestern town. They had adopted Emily when she was very young, at an age when she had no conscious memories of her earliest years. The adoptive parents both worked in local crafts. The father was a repairman, the mother made pottery sold at weekend markets. Their simple, low-profile lifestyle kept Emily in a quiet, stable, and fairly sheltered world. Emily was a gentle, calm child who got along better with adults than with kids her own age. Her adoptive parents gave her genuine love. There was never any sign of abuse or pressure. She grew up surrounded by handmade objects, desert colors, the classical music on the radio every evening, and quiet walks around the neighborhood. To all appearances, Emily was a child with clear roots, at least according to the story her adoptive family told her. Yet when Emily reached about 7 or 8, the first questions began, as they often do with adopted children. Where did she really come from? Who were her birth parents? Why had she been given up? Each time she asked, Her adoptive parents gave sometimes evasive answers, that they had received her from a woman who needed help, that the woman's circumstances didn't allow her to keep a child, that the adoption had happened in the spirit of kindness, and they wanted to protect Emily from anything too complicated. Those answers made Emily hesitate to press further, but a vague emptiness about her own history remained. As a teenager, irregularities in her paperwork started to catch her eye. Her birth certificate was a copy, not the original, and the registration date was recorded much later than the listed birth date. The spaces for biological parents were blank, and the issuing agency didn't match the place the Carters claimed the adoption had happened. When she asked about it, her parents seemed flustered but stuck to the same story. "You were given to us under special circumstances." There was no official adoption record ever filed in Arizona, and as Emily grew older, she realized her adoption had never gone through full legal channel. While her classmates had medical histories, newborn photos and clear timelines, Emily had only a thin stack of mismatched papers and vague stories. Occasionally at extended family gatherings, a relative would half-joke that Emily had appeared out of thin air, which only deepened her unease. Though her adoptive parents were consistently loving and she never felt deprived, the inconsistencies in the paperwork and the adoption story became a quiet shadow that followed her into adulthood. By high school, Emily noticed more small gaps: no infant vaccination records, no hospital birth records, no family photos from her first year except a few blurry ones, and no witness outside her parents who could confirm the handoff. She tried to believe they stayed quiet to spare her a sad story about the woman who gave her up, but the feeling of missing a piece of her past grew persistent, especially when friends casually recounted their own newborn stories. Emily grew into a quiet, introspective young woman, yet the questions about her origins never left her mind. Whenever she looked at the birth certificate with its big blank spaces, she wondered where her life had actually begun and who had brought her to Arizona all those years ago. With no concrete information, she had no way to trace anything. Everything she knew about her origins came from what her adoptive parents told her, and more of it didn't quite line up with what the documents showed. While Emily Carter in Arizona continued to grow up with unanswered questions about her origins, in Florida the Bennett family, after years of zero progress from law enforcement, gradually turned to the new relative-finding tools that appeared in the late 2000s and early 2010s, consumer DNA testing. A cousin of Michael Bennett who enjoyed genealogy as a hobby uploaded his DNA to an online service just to explore the family's ancestry. At first it had nothing to do with Olivia's disappearance, it was purely personal. When the results came back, however, the system flagged a close relative with an extremely high DNA match that didn't correspond to anyone the family knew. The anomaly immediately raised eyebrows. In consumer DNA databases, matches are usually distant, third or fourth cousins or farther, but the match this cousin received fell in the range of a grandchild or direct descendant. No one in the Bennett family knew of such a person, and the age of the individual, based on public profile information, lined up almost exactly with how old Olivia would be if she were still alive. The family was stunned. After decades of hope, followed by disappointment, this DNA match was clear enough to make them wonder. The cousin immediately told Michael and Sandra, and the whole family decided to take the results seriously. They started building a simple DNA map based on the match percentages. The username's location showed Arizona, a strange coincidence with scattered old tips years earlier about unidentified children in the Southwest. The Bennetts didn't dare believe Olivia might still be alive, but the match was too precise to ignore. They contacted the testing company for expanded analysis, and the second round confirmed the same thing. The Arizona user was a direct blood relative of the Bennett family. The list of possible people quickly narrowed. The account was listed as Emily's, with public information showing she lived near Mesa, Arizona. When the Bennetts combined the DNA data with the estimated age, everything lined up almost perfectly with Olivia's real age, if she had survived. The coincidence couldn't be random. The family sat in silence at the possibility. After more than 3 decades of pain and uncertainty, a relative's casual DNA test had opened a door they never thought would open again. No one knew the proper next steps, but they understood this information had to reach the authorities. Without delay, Michael contacted the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office and asked to speak to the cold case unit. When investigators heard about a close DNA match to the victim's family, they took it seriously and asked for all the testing data. After years of nothing, this unexpected DNA hit was the first strong signal convincing the cold case unit to reopen the file and explore the possibility that Olivia, the child who vanished from a crowded supermarket in 1985, might still be alive thousands of miles away. For the first time in 30 years, the Bennett family felt something close to real hope. Immediately after receiving the unusual DNA information from the Bennett family, the cold case unit requested additional DNA samples from Olivia's closest blood relatives to verify the result. Michael and Sandra agreed, as did several first and second-degree relatives, Sandra's sister, Michael's brother, and another close cousin. These samples were sent to a lab that works with law enforcement, equipped to perform deeper analysis than commercial services can provide. Collecting multiple independent samples from different branches of the family was essential to build an accurate genetic family tree. Only through such samples could experts determine the true relationship between Emily C. and the entire Bennett family, not just one distant cousin. Once the additional samples arrived, forensic genealogists began constructing an extended family tree map. They combined the commercial DNA data with the lab's internal tools to measure how Emily's DNA matched each Bennett family member. The mapping relied not only on raw match percentages, but on the distribution of shared segments across different branches. When the data was processed, the picture quickly emerged. Emily shared a large amount of DNA with Olivia's first-degree relatives, and the match percentages with Michael and Sandra were so high they could not be explained by any distant relationship. The experts narrowed it to three possibilities. Emily was a direct descendant, a direct niece, or she was the missing child herself. From deeper analysis of maternal and paternal markers made it clearer, Emily carried markers that perfectly matched Olivia's maternal line and a significant portion of the paternal line. The experts became nearly certain that Emily could not belong to any side branch. She had to be in the direct line. Since the Bennetts had no other missing or relinquished child, Emily could only be Olivia. When the complete family tree was finished, the match level was in the parent-child range, a level virtually impossible to fake. Analysts also tested for random matches or data gaps, but every exclusion test pointed to the same conclusion. Emily was the only person who fit Olivia's exact place in the Bennett tree. With a full genetic genealogy report in hand, the team issued an official finding to the cold case unit, stating that the individual known as Emily Carter was not merely a close relative but a direct parent-child blood relative of the Bennett family. This scientific conclusion carried extremely high certainty, well beyond reasonable doubt, and was strong enough to justify reopening the missing person case. The cold case unit immediately called a special meeting. The Olivia Bennett file, closed since the late 1980s and only superficially reviewed in the 1990s, now had brand new, powerful, scientifically reliable evidence that investigators of the original era could never have accessed. What they had been unable to do for over 30 years, forensic genealogy had accomplished in weeks, pinpointing an individual with direct blood ties to the victim. After reviewing the report, the unit concluded that the case must be formally reopened. They noted that a little girl disappearing in 1985 and resurfacing thousands of miles away with a new identity could not rest on a commercial DNA match alone, but the family tree built from multiple independent samples had crossed the necessary threshold for a high-level investigation. The case file was remarked, shifted to active investigation status, and the next phase of the investigation was launched, for the first time in more than 30 years since the day Olivia vanished. When the genealogy report from the forensic genealogy team was delivered, the cold case unit immediately activated the protocol to reopen the 19. For the first time in over 3 decades, the Olivia Bennett file was placed on the table as an active investigation, rather than a periodic review. Their first step was to gather every piece of old evidence, from crime scene reports, witness statements, suspect sketches, lists of suspicious vehicles, to the original investigators' handwritten notes, and re-examine everything from a completely new perspective, with the central focus being the possibility that the victim was still alive. A dedicated team re-analyzed the scene data, cross-referencing timelines, locations, and suspect descriptions to determine whether anything had been overlooked or incorrectly assessed due to the technological limitations of that era. Although the quality of the old documents was far from perfect, processing them with modern methods revealed several minor details that had previously been dismissed as insignificant. For example, note about a woman wearing a wide-brimmed hat seen around the supermarket in the week before the disappearance, or a sea green vehicle captured on a nearby store's camera but with an unreadable license plate. Things that in 1985 were not enough to expand the investigation were now treated as leads, requiring thorough re-evaluation. Alongside the review of physical evidence and statements, another team was tasked with comparing childhood photos of Olivia with the rare publicly available images related to Emily Carter. Although Emily had never widely shared personal information, a few photos existed in census records or old-school pictures. The analysis team used facial recognition software to compare the basic facial structures of the two girls, more than 30 years apart, focusing on features that change little over time: the distance between the eyes, the contour of the nose, facial proportions, and the shape of the eyebrow. The recognition algorithms returned a similarity score far above average, strong enough to reinforce the DNA results and convince the cold case unit that they were on the right track. Beyond images, the investigators also examined similarities in habits, bodily identifiers, and any recorded medical marks, though there were few because Olivia disappeared at such a young age. Every child has distinctive marks, small birthmarks, minor deformities, or biometric features that barely change. Some of this information was preserved in Olivia's pre-1985 medical records, and when compared with Emily Carter's records in Arizona, numerous striking matches emerged. Meanwhile, the team revisited 1985 witness statements to see whether the description of the woman in the wide-brimmed hat could be linked to anyone who lived in Arizona when Emily was young. All old statements were digitized, key descriptive phrases flagged, then cross-referenced with new data about when Emily appeared in Arizona. For instance, one witness had noted the woman walked with a distinctive slight stoop. Another said she carried a large handbag and seemed familiar with the supermarket. When the cold case unit compared these descriptions with records from Emily's foster family, they found eerie overlaps in timing and circumstances. Emily was recorded as arriving in Arizona shortly after the Florida disappearance, and the woman who handed Emily to the Carter family left no paperwork whatsoever, perfectly consistent with the mysterious woman pattern from the. Although this information was not enough to identify the 1985 suspect, it further strengthened the consistency that Emily was indeed Olivia Bennett. As the analysis teams completed most of the old evidence comparisons from photographs and DNA data to witness statements and timeline matches, overall picture became clear enough for the cold case unit to move to the most critical step: preparing to formally approach Emily Carter to verify her identity. This approach could not be done casually. The investigators had to ensure every hypothesis was reasonably vetted, every supporting piece of data was scientifically grounded, and no misleading coincidences remained. They compiled a comprehensive summary report incorporating results from forensic genealogy, facial analysis, archival records, and travel timelines, then submitted it to command for approval to proceed with direct investigation. Because if Emily truly was Olivia, this contact would be the first time in over 30 years that law enforcement had the chance to stand face-to-face with someone long considered the victim of an unsolvable abduction. All these preparations were carried out cautiously yet urgently, so as not to miss the one opportunity this case had never had before: confronting the truth. After completing the review of old evidence and solidifying the new data obtained from genealogy analysis, the cold case unit reached the most crucial step: directly contacting Emily Carter in Arizona. Because this was a highly sensitive case involving the possibility that a missing person had lived under a new identity for over 3 decades, every action had to be discreet and strictly follow legal protocol. First, they coordinated with Arizona law enforcement to verify Emily's personal information, residential address, legal status, residence history, and any public records that could be compared with Olivia Bennett's data. Everything collected matched expectations. Emily was born around the early 1980s, informally adopted, and had no original documents regarding her biological parents. When the initial verification uncovered no contradictions, the team decided on direct contact. 2 investigators from the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office flew to Arizona to meet Emily with local police support. The approach took place at her home in the form of a voluntary interview, with no coercive element. Emily appeared surprised and somewhat anxious when she learned they were from Florida and wanted to discuss her origins, but she agreed to talk. The investigators began by asking about her earliest memories, fragmented recollections, what her adoptive parents had told her, personal records, and any adoption-related paperwork. Emily provided everything she had, including a copy of her birth certificate with many blank fields and medical records issued later in childhood. When the investigators asked to see childhood photos, Emily produced several taken by her adoptive parents when she was young, but none existed before age 3. This gap aligned perfectly with the voids the team had already identified in the Bennett file. After completing the personal information verification, the investigators explained that a DNA profile in a genealogy database had shown a close match with the Bennett family in Florida, a family whose daughter disappeared, and they stressed that they were not jumping to conclusions, but to clarify the matter, Emily would need to take an official DNA test for comparison. Emily was initially confused and unsure how to react, but since she had long harbored doubts about her own origins, the offer of a DNA test touched on something she had never had the chance to pursue. After thinking it over, she voluntarily agreed to the test. The procedure was performed right there at her home using a professional collection kit that included a cheek swab and identity documentation. The sample was sent for analysis not only to confirm kinship, but also for comprehensive comparison with all previously collected Bennett family DNA samples. Once the DNA sample was sealed and shipped, the investigators continued talking with Emily to gather more details about when she was handed to her adoptive family. She said her adoptive mother told her an unidentified woman had given her to them at a location near the state line, provided no paperwork, and only said the child needed a safe place. That description matched almost exactly the 1985 statements about the woman in the wide-brimmed hat, a connection that made the investigators see clear overlap between two stories that had seemed entirely separate. They did not reveal every detail to avoid influencing her memory or emotions, but they knew the information she provided aligned with the missing person case to an undeniable degree. When the meeting ended, the investigators returned to Florida with Emily's DNA sample and copies of all personal documents she had voluntarily provided. This information was logged and sent for analysis, ready for direct comparison with the Bennett family data. For the cold case unit, this step was a major milestone. After years of no progress, they finally had the chance to directly compare the DNA of an individual who astonishingly fit the genealogy profile. For Emily, that meeting was the first crack in the hazy walls surrounding her childhood. A sign that somewhere beyond Arizona, a story she had never been told, might finally be revealed. When Emily Carter's DNA sample arrived back in Florida and was sent to the lab, nearly the entire cold case team followed every step of the testing process, knowing these results would determine whether 3 decades of mystery could finally be resolved. The analysis used technology far more advanced than the traditional tests of the 1980s and 1990s. The lab extracted the DNA and compared every genetic segment of Emily's profile against samples collected from the Bennett family weeks earlier. Each marker and gene locus was run through specialized algorithms to determine exact match probability, not just general kinship, but full 2-parent inheritance patterns. 1 part from Michael Bennett, 1 part from Sandra Bennett. As preliminary results started coming in, the analysts knew immediately they were looking at something undeniable. Emily's DNA segments matched the Bennett family at a level that could only be explained by a parent-child relationship. No other possibility remained. The official report was completed within days and sent directly to the cold case unit. In the document, the lab stated, Emily Carter's DNA sample matched Michael and Sandra Bennett's samples with a probability exceeding 99.999%, a virtually absolute figure. That meant Emily was not a distant relative or a descendant of another branch. She was Olivia Bennett, the child who vanished in night. Upon receiving the report, the investigators paused for a few seconds before reading further, as if needing time to absorb the outcome they had waited years to see. They immediately contacted Michael and Sandra, but following protocol, only informed them that the DNA results were in, and the family needed to come to headquarters for an in-person brief. In a private conference room, the lead investigator presented the full analysis report to the couple who had waited more than 3 decades. Michael lowered his head, and Sandra broke into tears the moment she heard the official confirmation. Emily Carter was their daughter, Olivia Bennett. It was not just the resolution of a case, it was a truth that had been buried under layers of time, pain, and despair for 31 years. After confirming the victim's identity, The next step for the agency was to update the legal records. Olivia Bennett's file, previously marked missing, presumed abducted, was changed to located, living. All identification data was updated, including DNA, physical descriptors, comparison photos, and the date of discovery. Emily Carter's records in Arizona were cross-checked, and an identity verification report was sent to Arizona's civil authorities, stating that her legal identity was Olivia Bennett, born in Florida, and several complex legal procedures had to be completed, including validating the birth certificate, updating adoption status, and adjusting Emily's residency record. Although Emily was an adult with full autonomy over whether to change this information, authorities still had to handle all aspects related to the discrepancy between her former and true identity. Once the legal paperwork was finalized, the cold case unit shifted its investigative focus to the next big question. No longer is Olivia alive, but who took her to Arizona, and, with the victim's identity now conclusively established, tracing the origin of the child handover became the primary investigative direction. This required the team to re-examine the Carter family's statements, verify the exact location where Emily was handed over, the precise timing, the identity of the mysterious woman who delivered the child, and whether anyone else was involved in moving Olivia from Florida to Arizona. The DNA confirmation closed one chapter of the story, but simultaneously opened an entirely new investigative phase, where the focus was no longer on finding the victim, but on following the trail of the person who took the little girl from the supermarket in 19. This was the direction the cold case unit knew they had to pursue to the end. Immediately after the DNA results confirmed that Emily was indeed Olivia Bennett, the cold case unit returned to Arizona to further clarify her origins by interviewing the very people who had raised her, the Carter family. Although the first meeting had focused solely on verifying personal information and collecting DNA samples, this second approach was designed to dig deeper into the circumstances under which Emily had been handed over to them. In order to identify the mysterious individual who had transported a child all the way from Florida to Arizona, without leaving any legal trace. When the investigators explained the DNA results and the purpose of the session, Emily's adoptive parents, Richard and Marlene Carter, appeared both stunned and deeply moved. They insisted they had never suspected Emily might be a missing child, and they had always believed they were doing the right thing by taking in a little girl who needed a home. When asked for details about the moment Emily was given to them, both recounted the story with striking accuracy, as though it were a memory that had stayed with them for years despite being buried under decades of silence. Richard said that sometime in late 1985 or early 1986, a strange woman approached him at an apartment complex on the outskirts of Phoenix, where he was doing temporary electrical repair work. The woman seemed tense but composed and asked if he knew any family who could take in a small child, because her own circumstances no longer allowed her to keep raising the little girl. At first Richard thought it was a scam and kept his distance, but when the woman showed him the child she had with her, a clean, healthy little girl about 1 year old, he started to listen. When he asked about the biological parents or legal paperwork, the woman said the child had been entrusted to her group and that she was simply on a mission to find a good home for the baby. That answer made Richard hesitate, but before he could press further, the woman added that she was in the middle of a journey and could not keep the child any longer. After discussing it with his wife Marlene, who was unable to have children, the couple decided to meet the woman again in a remote area near the desert. They brought some baby supplies and asked for proper documentation, but the woman insisted she was not authorized to provide any, and suggested they take the child informally, stressing that the little girl needed a family immediately. Marlene clearly remembered that the woman spoke softly, was never aggressive or pushy, yet her face carried an inexplicable air of secrecy. When the investigators asked for a physical description, both Marlene and Richard gave identical details. The woman wore a wide-brimmed light-colored hat. A thin coat despite the Arizona weather, not being particularly cold, carried a large handbag, had an average build, and moved quickly but discreetly. Every single detail matched the 1985 witness descriptions from the supermarket where Olivia disappeared. When the investigators pointed this out, the Carters were speechless. They had never imagined the woman could be a kidnapper. They had simply assumed she was a struggling mother, or part of some charitable organization. When asked about the woman's behavior and exact words, Richard recalled that she had briefly mentioned a group traveling through many states on a spiritual mission, but when he asked for more details she refused to answer. That immediately caught the investigators' attention, because the phrase spiritual mission and traveling across multiple states matched the profile of several nomadic religious groups active in the. Marlene also recalled that before leaving the woman said, "This child will be safer with you," then quickly got into an older car of indeterminate color because it was dark and drove off toward the desert highway. The Carters could not remember the license plate, but Richard was certain it was a mid-size sedan, again matching the description of the sea green car in Olivia's disappearance. The investigators pressed for any further information about the religious group or organization the woman had mentioned. Marlene admitted that during the first encounter, the woman had said her group did not keep children for long, and that they usually placed children with families who could care for them better. Upon hearing that detail, the investigators noted it immediately, because it was a known pattern among some loosely structured nomadic religious groups that traveled state to state and operated outside the law. Although the Carters did not know the group's name, dates of operation, or any precise information, their testimony was enough to connect the scattered dots between the 1985 disappearance and Emily's appearance in Arizona just months later. Their account from the way Emily was handed over, the strange woman's appearance, the haste of her departure, and the complete absence of paperwork, mirrored the old case file so closely that the cold case unit knew they had just found a critical piece of the puzzle. Even though the Carters clearly had no malicious intent and were in no way involved in any crime, their testimony revealed the presence of a shadowy group that may have been involved in moving Olivia across state lines. And that opened an entirely new investigative direction, the first solid lead after more than 3 decades of silence. The details provided by the Carters about the woman who handed over Emily, especially her mention of a group carrying out a spiritual mission and their habit of constantly moving across states, immediately shifted the cold case unit's focus to tracking down nomadic religious groups that had been active in Florida and the Southwest during the mid-1980s. Archived FBI files and old local law enforcement reports revealed that the era was rife with small, unregistered groups operating as closed communities, traveling between states, and generally avoiding contact with authorities. When one investigator entered the Carters' key descriptors into the system, not keeping children long, giving children to other families, using religious language, women wearing wide hats or head coverings, one name stood out: River of Morning Light Fellowship, a mobile religious group that had been most active from the late 1970s to the mid-1980s. The group had previously been reported to authorities for suspected involvement in moving infants and small children across state lines, though never formally charged due to lack of direct witnesses. Using the old files, the team immediately dug deeper. River of Morning Light Fellowship had no fixed headquarters. They lived in caravans, camped in remote areas, and moved constantly, sometimes in large groups of 20-30 people, sometimes splitting into cells of just. They described themselves as a fellowship of light, believed in living apart from mainstream society, and practiced rituals devised by a leader. Although never classified as dangerous, their secretive practices had triggered multiple investigations over suspicions of taking children from mothers in difficult circumstances. Reports noted that members often wore light robes, and women covered their heads with scarves or wide-brimmed hats to shield themselves from worldly energy. That detail alone convinced the cold case unit they were on the right track. When the team cross-referenced the group's known movements with the timeline of Olivia's disappearance, they discovered that in 1985, the River of Morning Light Fellowship had been documented in eastern Texas in the spring, then moved through Louisiana, and reached Florida by early summer, exactly when Olivia was taken. Even more striking, a 1986 report from Arizona placed a small faction of the group near Phoenix at the same time Emily was handed to the Carters. Connecting those 2 points revealed an almost perfect overlap between the group's travel route and Olivia's journey after she vanished. The next phase was to locate membership lists from different periods. Although the group was never legally registered, state and federal agencies had occasionally compiled temporary rosters whenever the fellowship camped on public land. The lists were incomplete and sometimes recorded only religious nicknames, but they were still useful for comparison. The cold case unit filtered members documented between 1984 and 1987, focusing on women who matched the 1985 description. Average build, often wearing hats or head coverings, traveling in small groups, and involved in placing children with divinely guided families, as the group described it in gatherings. After reviewing dozens of names, the list narrowed. Certain names appeared repeatedly across states, but one stood out above the rest, a woman listed in records only as Sister Mariah. She showed up in at least 3 reports from 3 different states, Texas, Louisiana and Arizona. Each described her as a thin woman aged 30-40, wearing a head covering or wide-brimmed hat, carrying a large bag, and serving as the group's primary spokesperson to outsiders. A 1985 Florida report described a similar woman asking for directions to residential areas near Jacksonville, matching that year's witness statements. What especially caught the investigators' attention was a 1986 Arizona report. A couple reported seeing a group of 3 women, one called Mariah, leave a campsite with a small child and disappear from the area overnight. The timing was not exact, but fell within the window when Emily appeared in Arizona. When the investigators compared the description of Sister Mariah with the 1985 suspect, the matches were undeniable: wide-brimmed hat, thin coat, average build, quick but purposeful movement, always cautious yet never panicked. Reviewing every report involving Mariah, the team uncovered one crucial pattern. In several instances, witnesses noted she would temporarily vanish from the group when they stopped in large cities, and those absences roughly coincided with reports of missing children in the states the group passed through, though no case had direct evidence linking the fellowship. With all this data, the cold case unit realized Sister Mariah was not just a name on a list. She could very well be the mysterious woman at the Jacksonville supermarket. There were no clear photographs for comparison, no fixed address, and Mariah's legal record was completely blank. Yet every piece of evidence, from physical description, movement style, informal child placement behavior, to the group's travel route, pointed to the same person. That conclusion marked one of the investigation's most significant turning points, finally revealing a credible suspect who may have taken Olivia from Florida more than 3 decades earlier. The information gathered about River of Morning Light Fellowship and the prime suspect Sister Mariah forced the cold case unit into a broader analytical phase, examining Olivia's case within the context of similar child disappearances across the United States during the same period. When the data analysis team entered the case into the National Comparison System, they discovered that from the late 1970s to the mid-1980s, several states had recorded incidents of very young children vanishing in public places where the last person seen with the child was a woman. A rare but real pattern. In some cases, witnesses described the woman wearing a hat or head covering, often accompanied by a small group, then disappearing without a trace. Although no case was ever proven to involve River of Morning Light Fellowship, the common characteristics raised serious questions about the operational patterns of nomadic religious groups at the time. The cold case unit began compiling a comparison chart between Olivia's abduction and other disappearances in Texas, Louisiana, New Mexico, and Arizona. Children aged 1 to 5, taken in a matter of minutes from supermarkets, highway rest stops, or shopping areas. Suspects were always women or small groups of women, and crucially, these cases involved no official paperwork, no ransom demands, and no clear connection to the birth parents. Factors that caused most of them to be classified as uninvestigable back then. Through comparison, the team saw that the behavior in Olivia's case fit the pattern of a planned, mobile group. The suspect acted quickly, caused no panic, chose crowded locations to blend in, and left in a pre-prepared vehicle. Unlike typical personal motivation or lone offender kidnappings, this model suggested a ready-made network with travel routes, temporary safe houses, and the ability to disperse children to other states. When analyzing the fellowship's activities, investigators noted that the group frequently split into subunits of 2-4 women who traveled across states on cycles, sometimes stopping in populated areas to collect supplies or carry out what the group called spiritual tasks. Local reports over the years showed the fellowship avoided law enforcement attention, never bury in one place long, and often vanished after a few days. That matched the fact that Olivia disappeared without the suspect ever being identified, only to resurface months later in Arizona, in the hands of a woman just passing through. Digging deeper, the cold case unit found the group had loose ties to various faith communities in multiple states, but nothing resembling tight organization. They had no official leader in the legal sense, no stable membership roster, and each subunit operated almost independently. However, old reports from Louisiana and Texas indicated certain individuals served as connectors, people who moved between subunits, coordinated temporary stops, and sometimes acted as the public face. Sister Mariah stood out precisely because she filled that role. When investigators checked interstate and state-level records, they reopened unresolved 1980s reports and discovered several jurisdictions had once suspected the group of moving unidentified children, but never had enough evidence to charge or launch formal investigation. New Mexico Social Services had documented a case of a child being informally placed with a local family by a woman from a nomadic religious group, but by the time authorities tried to follow up, the group was gone. Arizona had a similar file from because these incidents were scattered and there was no national data linking system at the time, no one had ever recognized the larger pattern. The cold case unit, by piecing together clues across 30 years, realized that if a group was responsible for Olivia, it was not a traditional violent kidnapping, but rather a religiously cloaked system of child placement. Yet despite the matching behavioral patterns and travel routes, the team still could not definitively identify the direct perpetrator. No witness could provide Sister Mariah's real name, there were no photographs, no records, no digital footprint, none existed in that era. The old reports were too vague, and the religious group's files were practically non-existent. Thus, although the cold case unit had constructed the clearest picture yet of the network and its operating model, the question of exactly who walked Olivia out of that supermarket still understanding the structure and pattern of this network moved the case forward significantly, an essential step toward confronting the most difficult phase of the investigation still to come. After completing the analysis of the abduction pattern and clearly identifying the circumstances under which Olivia was taken to Arizona, the cold case unit moved on to a deeply humane yet highly cautious task: organizing the reunion between Emily, now legally confirmed as Olivia Bennett, and her biological family. The first step was to finalize all legal procedures verifying her identity. Authorities in Florida and Arizona worked together to cross-check personal records, update identification documents, and confirm that Emily Carter legally held the identity of Olivia Bennett, born in 1980. This required approval from an Arizona state court, where Emily had lived most of her life. Although she was an adult and no longer needed a guardian, changing identification information had to be carefully reviewed to avoid any legal conflicts between her old and new identities. Once the court approved the process, the cold case unit began coordinating between the two families, the biological Bennett family in Florida and the Carter family in Arizona. This was a sensitive step, as both sides had complex emotions. One had waited more than 3 decades to see their daughter again, while the other consisted of the adoptive parents, who had raised her from childhood and were now facing the reality that their daughter had an entirely different path. The agency's psychological support team was brought in to ensure both families understood their roles, boundaries, and the proper way to conduct a safe reunion that placed no pressure on Olivia. Emily, or Olivia, was fully briefed on the entire process, the potential psychological effects, and her right to make decisions at every stage. She was not forced to meet anyone immediately. Every step had to be based on her voluntary consent. Despite being overwhelmed by the truth, Olivia expressed a desire to meet her biological family after taking serious time to think it over. To prepare for the meeting, the cold case unit and psychological support team recommended holding it at a neutral location, not either family's home, to create a balanced environment and reduce emotional pressure. After many discussions, they agreed on a quiet community center in Jacksonville, close to where Olivia was born, but not near the old supermarket or any sites that might trigger negative memories. The date and time were scheduled to give both families enough time to prepare mentally. The Bennett family was guided on how to approach, how to communicate, and most importantly to respect Olivia's feelings, because she had lived her entire life with another family and could not instantly fill a 31-year gap in a single day. The Carter family was reassured that they were not being removed from Olivia's life. Their role was recognized and respected. This helped ease the fear of losing their child that many adoptive parents feel in similar situations. Finally, before the reunion day, the psychological support team assessed Olivia's readiness as well as the emotional state of both families. They checked for risks of psychological crisis, stress levels, and unrealistic expectations. Every potential trigger for shock or trauma was thoroughly discussed. Because this reunion was not just a happy moment but also a major emotional shock, the coordinators ensured everyone entered the meeting as prepared as possible. Once all preparations were complete, they only had to wait for the moment Olivia walked into the room where her biological family, the people who had held on to hope for 3 decades, was waiting to see the child they thought was lost forever. When reunion day arrived, the atmosphere at the Jacksonville Community Center felt solemn yet charged with nervous anticipation, as though everyone was witnessing the moment time had owed the Bennett family for over 3 decades. The cold case unit and psychological support team were there early, setting up the meeting room and arranging seats so both families had their own space yet remained close enough to feel connected. Michael and Sandra Bennett arrived first, their hands trembling slightly, despite trying to stay composed. On the table in front of them was a prepared folder, photos of Olivia as a little girl, pictures of Emily at various ages, DNA results, and certified legal documents. They had looked at these materials countless times, but this was the first time they were preparing to face the truth in the flesh. When the door opened and Olivia walked in, time seemed to freeze. There she stood, not the 4-year-old girl from the Bennett's memories, but a grown woman with a calm yet clearly emotional face. The support team guided both sides, not to rush forward with hugs, but to let Olivia decide the first moment of physical contact. Sandra couldn't hold back tears when she looked into Olivia's eyes. Those light brown eyes were identical to the little girl from long ago. Michael stood slowly, trying not to overwhelm Olivia, and simply said her name, Olivia. Olivia was silent for a few seconds, then burst into tears and stepped forward, wrapping her arms around both of them. That was the moment that needed no further explanation. No one could doubt the truth anymore. That hug contained 31 years of loss, pain, and hope that never died. After the emotional peak, the meeting moved to the official confirmation portion with both families and investigators present. The lead investigator presented the complete chain of legal verification, parent-child DNA results, genealogical analysis, facial comparison across life stages, and medical data matching records from when Olivia was young. Each item was explained clearly to ensure no lingering doubts about identity remained. Olivia listened, occasionally glancing at her biological parents and her adoptive parents, as if piecing together fragments of her life. When the investigator showed the photo of 4-year-old Olivia, the one Sandra had carried with her all her life, Olivia took it and touched it as though looking at a lost version of herself. She said that although she had no memories of early childhood, the face in the photo felt familiar, not through memory but through instinct. The agency then issued the final identity confirmation. Olivia Bennett's file was updated to status verified victim, alive. This completed the administrative process, but carried enormous meaning. It completely erased the missing person label that had followed her for 31 years and officially recorded Olivia as a surviving victim of an interstate kidnap. The Bennett family sat in stunned silence upon hearing the announcement, for the hope they had carried quietly, the thing they had prayed for through hundreds of sleepless nights, had now become official fact. For Olivia, this was the first time she understood that her life had begun in a way no one could have imagined. Taken from her biological family at age 4, and living under a new identity without knowing she was part of an unsolved case. After the announcements, investigators gave the two families private time to talk. Olivia shared what she knew of her childhood. The Carters recounted raising her and the odd signs they had once noticed. The Bennetts listened with gratitude that their daughter had been raised with kindness, and the Carters felt relief, knowing they had not unintentionally harmed anyone. The reunion ended in an atmosphere mixing relief, deep emotion, and lingering pain, because although Olivia had been found, the question of who took her in. Nevertheless, from a legal and investigative standpoint, a major chapter closed. Olivia Bennett's file was officially changed to victim located alive. Victim found alive after 30. This marked the end of a 3-decade search, but only the beginning of the many questions the case still left behind. After the emotional reunion in Jacksonville, Olivia, who was still called Emily in everyday life, entered the most difficult phase, reconciling the two parallel identities that now existed within her. Returning to Arizona after the meeting, she fell into emotional turmoil as parts of her life she thought were fixed suddenly became unsteady. Everything about her changed: how she viewed her childhood, her origins, the image of her biological parents, and even the meaning of the name she had carried for over 3 decades. Mental health professionals emphasized that this process was like rebuilding one's own foundation. Delicate and painful, Olivia attended weeks of therapy where she learned to connect the newly revealed memories with her real life. The sessions helped her confront feelings of guilt, even though it was in no way her fault for having lived a life that wasn't hers. At the same time, she was guided on how to maintain gratitude toward the Carter family, who raised her with pure love, while opening her heart to the Bennett family, who had lost their child for 31 years. Relations between the two families were initially tense. Sandra Bennett felt both joy and heartbreak knowing her daughter had been alive, but not with her. Marlene Carter worried their role would be diminished, but through professional support and Olivia's own conciliatory attitude, the families gradually found common ground. Olivia firmly stated that she had two families, each holding an important part of her life. This not only eased tensions, but also helped both sides respect each other as people who shared love for the same woman. The Bennetts started with regular short phone calls full of hope. They told Olivia about the years searching, the moments they almost gave up, and the unending longing. Olivia listened quietly, sometimes crying, but she knew entering their story required caution. She needed time to absorb it piece by piece. The Carters remained the family she returned to every day, the ones who knew her smallest habits and preferences. They looked through childhood photos together, handmade crafts her adoptive mother had done with her, reminding her that her life was not all loss. She had also had a peaceful childhood because of them. Thanks to that harmony, Olivia did not have to choose between families, something many long-term reunited victims face. Still, adjusting daily life was not easy. Olivia had to revise every legal document: driver's license, social security, medical records, even the name on her employment file. Legally carrying her true identity meant changing information across countless government systems. The process came with a sense of alienation. Each corrected document was not just paperwork, but a reminder that she herself was changing. At the same time, Olivia considered how to tell close friends and coworkers. She didn't want her story to become gossip, but knew it would be hard to hide once legal changes were made. She chose to share part of the story with those closest to her, stressing it was a personal journey and she wasn't ready to tell everything. Additionally, Olivia had to learn to handle conflicting emotions: excitement at discovering a large biological family, heartache thinking about her biological parents' 3 decades of waiting, and fear when considering she may have been a victim of a secretive religious group. As time passed, with ongoing professional support and patience from both families, Olivia gradually built a more harmonious life. She began texting Sandra in the mornings, calling Michael on weekends, while still keeping warm daily conversations with her adoptive parent. Slowly she realized her true identity did not replace the old one. It complemented it. Olivia and Emily were the same person, with two pieces forming one complete story. The final therapy sessions of the initial phase showed she had reached relative stability, strong enough to face the past, clear-headed enough to build the future. But she also knew the story was far from over, because her life still carried a question that neither family nor investigators had yet answered. Although the reunion between Olivia and her two families closed a dark chapter in a 31-year journey, the case still left unanswered questions, preventing the cold case unit and the community from considering it fully resolved. The person who directly took Olivia from the supermarket in 1985 has never been identified. Sister Mariah remains only a vague name in old reports, with no legal record, no photo, state or federal data to trace. All traces of her seem to have vanished when the River of Morning Light Fellowship group left Arizona and disappeared from law enforcement radar. Every clue about this individual exists only through second-hand accounts, making the chance of tracking her virtually zero. This forces investigators to accept that Olivia may never know who took her from Jacksonville or the true motive behind it. Additionally, the actual scale of the mobile religious group's child transfer network remains unclear. Reports from multiple states suggest the handoffs were not random, but without tracking systems, confirmed victims or records left behind. Investigators cannot determine whether this was an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern. Olivia's case is the only one proven through DNA and full reconstruction, but it raises a chilling question: how many other children may have been passed along the same way without anyone ever knowing? For the investigative community, the Olivia case has become powerful evidence of the importance of forensic genealogy, a tool that just over a decade ago no one thought could solve cold cases spanning decades. Without genetic genealogy, without a distant Bennett cousin taking a consumer DNA test by chance, and without the resulting family tree connections, the case would certainly still be gathering dust in a file cabinet. Forensic genealogy only found the victim but provided a way to verify identity where cameras, witnesses, and old data were useless. The Olivia case has therefore become a textbook example in criminal investigation seminars, demonstrating the power of modern technology combined with victim families' persistence and cold case units. But more importantly, the case created widespread societal impact. It reminds us that long-term missing persons cases should never be considered hopeless, that every cold case file represents a real person, a real family, and an unfinished story. Olivia's reunion also sparked broader discussion about informal adoptions in the past, legal loopholes that once allowed children to be moved across states without paperwork, and the need for tighter oversight of unstructured religious groups that once operated outside regulation. For Olivia herself, her story is both an ending and a new beginning. She has found her biological family, understood her origins, and entered long-term recovery to merge two severed halves of her life. But for the justice system and investigative community, the case remains a reminder that some questions will never be fully answered, and that is the nature of many decades-old disappearances. Still, finding Olivia alive after 3 decades stands as powerful proof of hope. Time does not always bury the truth, and sometimes a single strand of DNA is enough to bring someone back from the thetos of forgotten files. Olivia Emily's story set in today's America may sound far-fetched: nomadic religious group caravans crossing states, informal adoptions, but it actually touches on risks that still exist. Small children approached in public places, legal gaps around adoption, the false sense of safety in suburban life. Olivia vanished in just minutes, while Sandra bent down to check her shopping cart at a Jacksonville supermarket. That is a very specific reminder that at today's Walmart, Target, or Costco, one moment of distraction is all it takes. Practical lesson: never let small children out of sight. Teach them go with strangers, even if it's a nice lady or someone from church. And if someone like the woman in the wide-brimmed hat is watching your child too long, trust your gut and immediately alert store security or management. The detail that the Carter family accepted Emily from a strange woman with paperwork for a good cause recalls something very American: compassion must be paired with legality. If you want to adopt, go through official channels, licensed agencies, family law attorneys. Any private arrangement, no matter how humanitarian it sounds, can unintentionally aid kidnapping, trafficking, or concealing crime. On the other hand, the fact that a cousin's random DNA test created the breakthrough is a reminder of the power and responsibility of this technology. In the U.S., sharing DNA data on consumer platforms should be considered carefully, but if you have a missing loved one, proactively ask about law enforcement DNA matching programs or organizations like NAMUS, NC. The Bennett family's refusal to accept case closed as the end is a message to today's American parents and relatives. The system may have limits, but your voice, preserving documents, photos, memories, and willingness to cooperate again when new technology appears, can be the key to bringing a loved one back from the darkness of the file. Thank you for joining me to the end of the 31-year journey to find Olivia again. If stories like this touch you, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future cases solved through the power of community and technology. See you in the video, where we'll continue exploring stories that can change how we view safety and hope.